Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening around the world. Thank you for participating today from wherever you are. And it looks like we've got people literally everywhere around the world. So thank you for joining us for this important conversation. Let me mention here right in the beginning that we will have time for Q&A at the end. So whether you go into the chat room to raise your question or you send an email to info@globalchamber.org, we'll be able to handle it one way or another. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the CEO founder of Global Chamber, and I'm honored and pleased to introduce two very special guests today. We originally were speaking with Matthew Hoffer of the Spire strategy group actually last year about attending Davos, talking about digital transformation, what he saw there, how the transition from Industry 4.0 was going to Business 4.0. And lo and behold, COVID and coronavirus came along. And so we've made some adjustments in the program. As Matthew was explaining earlier, it's more, rather than a focus in on Industry 4.0 or Business 4.0, it's more around Cities 4.0, especially as we're seeing around the world, cities tackling these key challenges as they are with climate change and other challenges that cities are facing. It's definitely not business as usual. And so today what we're doing is modifying the presentation, talking to two really smart people about what opportunities are out there, what's actually happening, so that you can hopefully gain some information that helps you in your business. The two speakers we have are Hoffer, who I mentioned is with Spire Strategy. He's a digital transformation strategist and really one of the world's top experts in that area. And we have Raj Muppala, who's the CEO of AInfinity. And these two are gentlemen that are partners. Matthew is zooming in from Switzerland. Raj is zooming in from London. They've been working together. They've got some shared ideas and a shared presentation. And gentlemen, we really look forward to that. And for the watchers, please send your questions in along the way. Gentlemen, I'll turn it over to you, Matthew.
Great, thank you so much, Doug. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you're dialing into. From wherever you're dialing into. So yeah, thanks very much, Doug, and thank you to Global Chamber for hosting us. So, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly share my screen, and because I'm a bit of a digital immigrant, not a native, let's see that I can get this right. Okay. So just want to make sure that you can see the screen.
Sounds good. Looks good.
Great. So just to quickly introduce, so my name is Matthew Hoffer. I'm the founder and managing partner of Spire Strategy. We are a digital transformation advisory company, and our approach is a very much strategy first approach to digital transformation. We've seen a lot blockages when it comes to this in digital transformation. One of the most important issues that facing companies, they very much adopt tech first approach, and we've seen this go wrong a lot of times. So we're a very much strategy first approach. I'll talk a bit more about that later, but what we've also seen from clients is that they increasingly want an end-to-end solution. And so we're really happy to have established this strategic partnership with AInfinity and Raj, who's a good friend of mine, CEO and founder of AInfinity. They're an AI company, and so they very much provide the tech solution, which enables us both to come with a holistic end-to-end solution to the market. And so initially, as Doug mentioned, so I used to work at the World Economic Forum, and I was in Davos early this year, and I was going to report back on that, and I wrote an article about it on Global Chamber about, from Industry 4.0 to Business 4.0, and why that title. So of course, last May, Doug, we had this Globinar, and I spoke about Industry 4.0 and what that means for digital transformation. And so really that was going to be the 2.0 version. Then, of course, something happened to the world where I think I've read now almost half of the world's population is on lockdown. So we're really glad that we can do this digitally. And so very last minute then, obviously, we thought, well, how can we make this more relevant to the audience and something that I think would be more, impactful given the situation. And so what AInfinity do, and I'll let Raj introduce the second half, that component, but they do a lot of smart cities work. And as I mentioned, we do strategy work at the beginning, and really cities are I think, at the forefront of let's say this fight back. So I just wanted to touch a bit on that, and sort of maybe start by giving an overview of where kind of we are in this world. And so hence the title, Reimagining Our Lives in a Post-COVID World. And wait on a second. Right. So I just want to quickly recap, because just from the last Globinar, for those who dialed in, so, we defined Industry 4.0. And these two pictures, I think they're quite instructive. They tell us very much about, why are we at 4.0? So, on the left, you have Industry 1.0, and on the right, you have Industry 2.0. And of course, on the left, what was really, what happened there, it's about steam. And these factories are steam driven, and that was steam engine. That was Industry 1.0. And of course, the key point here is that these factories have to be close to water. And when you look at, on the right side, you see Industry 2.0, the big shift there is electricity. And so, of course, when you have electricity, you're no longer bound by geography, right? Your steam, you have to be close to water. And so what that meant is that caused a complete shift in business models. And suddenly, you can imagine companies that were, really prevalent in Industry 1.0 suddenly become obsolete in Industry 2.0. And the key point here is not so much the technology that disrupted them, it was the changes in strategy, the changes in the business models that were enabled through this shift to electricity. And so where we are now, Industry 3.0 on the left, home computers, and now Industry 4.0, this shift which we're living through as we speak, and we almost completed it now, again, just really want you to think about, it's about the design, less about the technology. And it's the disruptions going to come from that shift in business models. So Industry 4.0, what exactly is it? The way we define it, and Henrik van Schiel is considered one of the founders or innovators of Industry 4.0, it's really this fusion between the digital world, the physical world, and the virtual world. And of course, the digital world and the virtual world, you see all these fantastic technologies, some of them already realized to an extent, others increasingly so. And it's really that fusion that is what we call Industry 4.0. And very specifically, it's, how can entities, organizations, companies, cities, countries, how can any entity, any organizational structure use these technologies in a smart way, in a strategic way to take advantage, to advance their interests. And I think we'll touch upon that, and that's particularly important with this in this COVID-19 world. So what I was initially going to talk about, and I think when you all got the email, a few weeks ago about Industry 4.0 to Business 4.0, I was going to talk a bit about that because it was this shift that that I personally observed in Davos, which is, and in a normal world, we talk about that, Business 4.0. What is it? It's a smart digital transformation to navigate a world of complexity. So what does that jargon mean? So three things, as I mentioned: strategy first, very important to lead with strategy, to focus on things like the business model, people skills, processes, and data. So have that strategy first approach before applying technology. Always thinking about technological efficacy, that's really important. So understanding, if you're the leader of the organization, how does the technology in your company, how does it link to strategy? If you're doing a cloud migration, how will that enable your strategic objectives? So really having that technological efficacy. And then, of course, it's about digital transformation, not technology. And that's a shift I heard a lot. Many players are now saying, or have increasingly said, many CEOs have said recently, and you've heard this, I'm sure, we're now technology companies, everyone's a tech company. And of course, it's not really true, and nor should they be. You shouldn't try to be a tech player if you're not originally, a tech company. You should focus on the industry vertical and what you're good at. And what a lot of people get confused is being a tech company versus doing digital transformation well. And those are two very different things. And so the focus in Business 4.0 really should be on digital transformation. So that's in a normal world, but of course we're not in a normal world. And so what is here you see a group of soldiers, digitally reimagined, thankfully in color, and so they're all smiling. And if you don't know, so those are soldiers in the beginning of World War I. So here we are about August, September 1914, and they're all smiling, they're all laughing. And of course, you know, for those of you who know the history, the narrative on both sides was this will be a quick war and we'll all be back by Christmas. And I think there are strong parallels to today because, of course, the world is no longer normal. And so, you know, in many ways, I think this could be, you know, our 1914. And what do I mean by that? Is 1914 repeating itself? Well, here we see the WEF Global Risks Report, which came out just before Davos. I don't know how clearly you can see that, but every year they predict what are going to be the top risks facing the world going forward. And this came out in January, right? And on the right, you can see for the first time ever, all of the risks are climate related. So it's extreme weather, it's climate action, it's natural disasters, it's biodiversity, and it's environmental disasters. So those are considered the 5 risks for the world ahead. And of course, nothing on there about pandemics, even though it was already happening in China. And you can see, you know, how much the world has been impacted. And the reason I think this is important is because if you look at, you know, January 1914, very interesting conversation with Professor Niall Ferguson in Davos, and he made a really interesting point. He said, look, 100 years ago, if all of you, the Davos people, would have been, you know, in Davos 100 years ago, had it existed, nobody would have predicted that in 6-7 months there's going to be a war between, you know, UK and Germany, or there'll be a World War I. And of course, this is really telling because nobody had predicted this. So why is this important? Because of course that means really the world is changing in ways that are incredibly profound. And to say that we don't quite understand these changes is perhaps you know, the understatement of the or maybe the century so far. But we really, you know, we're living through exceptional times because never before has, I think, the global economy shut down to the extent that it has now. Nobody quite knows what it means going forward. And so we look at this in 4, you know, snapshot of a changing world, perhaps 4 areas that we think the world really will change. And so one of them is community. And so how, you know, will social cohesion change going forward? Will this mean that there will be a renewed faith in experts? Of course, we're very much in a fact-light world, or not. Of course, it'll involve finding new ways to connect, new ways to build networks, and that will be extremely important. Obviously, digital networks are key. You know, social interactions will change, and so what it means to be a community, that's something that's going to change. The second thing is, of course, the economy, and here, you know, how do we redesign how we calculate, how we think about GDP in a technological world, particularly now if everybody's working from home? This is something that needs to change. You know, are central bankers the right people to do it, or to what extent do central banks, those who calculate GDP, how does that need to change? Looking at, you know, innovation ecosystems, how will those change if everybody's now working from home? If digital first is being increased, there's a greater propensity to that. Still, very few countries have managed scale-ups beyond China and the United States. Of course, digital healthcare systems, that's something that will have a huge and will change enormously. How? Consumption habits, how will we have to change or think about consumption models? You know, we are used to going into shops, whether it's a supermarket, whether it's any type of shop, an ironmonger's, and the shelves are always full. That's what we're used to. Will that change? How will our consumption have to change? Obviously reducing in the inequality gap. A third thing is governance. You know, to what extent will the citizen-government relationship change? How do we begin regaining trust in institutions? How do we avoid things like a return to great power competition? And the fourth bucket that I'd just like to frame the snapshot of a changing world is obviously around technology. I think embedded finance is going to be something that will be you know, really, really key innovation going forward, and just really that fusion of finance and technology. Now we're all working from home, we're using data in different ways. What will this mean for, you know, I don't want to use the term artificial general intelligence, maybe just an advanced AI, but that's always been a data problem. And now we have we're going to generate a lot of additional societal data. How will that impact, you know, the let's say, development of an advanced artificial intelligence. Of course, you'll have AR, VR as well. So this is a kind of a framework that I would broadly, that I would put forward around how to begin thinking around how the world is changing. And when we think about this and we look at these four pillars of a changing world, right, and the world is going to change profoundly, so where are the solutions going to come from? And people are increasingly talking about the nation state, and and there are other, will it come from the corporate sector, or is this sort of nation state, or does it mean more transnationalism, more supranational institutions? But actually, given where most of us live today and who's really affected by this, I think that one thing that we definitely would put forward is that most of the solutions going forward in the future will come from things looking like this, and that's it's a futuristic city. But we absolutely think that cities inescapably will be part of the solution. And in fact, one thing that you may see is a reordering of global power structures, global governance structures towards cities. And so in many ways, these solutions that we're sort of searching for, maybe we're searching in the wrong places, maybe they're already there. And if that's the case, and if the solutions already are in cities, because that's where most of us live, and if we quickly go back and if we look at these, the snapshot of a changing world, cities and the people who live in cities, they are the ones who will be mostly driving this change. And so the question then is, of course, well, how do we do that? How can everybody participate in that? How do we change cities so that they can be the drivers of change? And well, the first question then is, well, what's the main problem here? And this, if you were to say, well, what's the problem here? Okay, it's traffic, it's not looking great. But actually, if you think about it, and this isn't just a problem with cities, but if you look around, just open the window, right? We are very much defined everywhere we are by 20th century infrastructure. Cities are still, of course they are, defined, they run on 20th century infrastructure. And you saw about 100 years ago, it took World War and then close to the Second World War, it wasn't maybe until the 1930s, 1940s that structure started beginning, you saw an upgrade of infrastructure to 20th century infrastructure from the 19th century. And that is something I think we're living through right now, where cities realize, we actively have to upgrade our infrastructure to the 21st century. And then of course, the next question is, well, that being so, what is it that we can do? In other words, how do we use technology to upgrade that infrastructure? Cities need to become a lot smarter to solve those aforementioned problems that I mentioned. And of course, one of the reasons why Raj and I, why we collaborate is because we realize that to be smarter is not just a technology problem. If you look at, for example, IoT, it is first and foremost a design problem. It's not necessarily a technological issue. How do we rethink first and foremost how we will do things differently? Strategy first, and then understanding how to apply technologies. And one thing that Raj and I that we have done, it's the focus really here has been to start small, because with the efficacy of the solution that we have, it's important obviously to have to be able to have this workable in enough cities. And so we say this is a solution that is designed for apologies if I mispronounced it, Chico, not Chicago. Chico is a city in California, a mid-sized city, and these should be the test beds of new smart city solutions. And of course, having smart city solutions, absolutely critical for better healthcare outcomes and to restructure the economy. So that's what I wanted to do, really, to tee it up. What I wanted to do here is to frame where we are, to frame where the issues are, to understand that it's the importance of leading with strategy, but then obviously if we think about an end-to-end solution, the technology aspect is completely critical. And so I wanted to hand over to Raj to then introduce some of the smart city solutions that we're currently working on, and so he can introduce what we're currently doing to try to solve some of these issues that I've introduced in the framework. So Raj, I'll hand over to you. I'll just exit the screen.
Sure. Sure. Hi, thanks, Matthew. This great presentation, fantastic, very relevant, and also absolutely necessary at this time for sure. Thank you for that, and thank you, Doug, for hosting such a great event at this time. Really appreciate that. I'll start presenting now. Hopefully, you'll see my screen in a second. Okay. Perfect. Can you hear me and see my screen here?
We can, Raj.
Perfect. Hi, it's Raj Muppala here, CEO of AInfinity here, and thank you for this opportunity today, and thank you everyone to take time today, obviously at this current time, to look at this important topic, what's happening in the current situation, right? So, as Matthew mentioned, we are an AI company helping businesses to actually develop explainable AI solutions, be it from the smart city initiatives and also many things in the financial services, in complex use cases like risk detection and fraud, predictive models and customer sentiments, and making it more explainable AI solutions to handle the big data problems in the current world. So here I'll talk about a little bit about what actually we have in the context of smart city. And the word, when I say smart city, is not about building a new city from the ground up. It's about bringing the efficiencies to the inhabitants, as well as to consume the resources efficiently and for a greener environment. Obviously, things like urban services and transportation, and making it more efficient for everyone involved in the city. Right. This is what it's kind of core underlining fundamentals for the smart city. And as Matthew pointed out right there in the current world, that there are so many pain points here in terms of the cities. Like the infrastructure is not meant for the current the growing population needs, because it's not sustainable, and the crime detection, things like the traffic management and the transportation management and energy management, it's not been efficiently handling currently, because obviously the infrastructure is not ready. And also, as you can see on the right hand side, there are so many different verticals that have been affected here in terms of transportation, all the way to the financial services and urban city services like planning, and many things like obviously IoT has been other thing as well, that many devices has been exploded in the current infrastructure, but obviously they don't have any intelligence to be able to give collective decisions, right? And of course, the things like government and administration processes too, that there needs to be kind of adapted to the new regulations and also the new working conditions, right? So this is about some of the pain points and also the ecosystem factors. And so as we all know, the fourth industrial revolution, we're talking everything is about the data here, right? So as data is exploding in a very exponential speed, and it's been a challenge for most businesses to actually see what actually is in the data and how I can able to make use of the data, right? So because that is actually driving most businesses to be profitable, as well as to understand the risk patterns, prediction behaviors, and their customer sentiments, or perhaps understanding the brand loyalty and things like that, right? As you can see on the big graph here, technologies like IoT and 5G, and obviously a lot of data being generated from many systems, and also the cloud computing and virtualization. I think it's just it's too much data to handle, and this is where AI is actually AI is proven actually to handle many of these big data problems, in actually giving this realistic information about getting into millions of data feeds and actually giving that information. Otherwise, it's, as humans, we are all intelligent, we have a lot of different capabilities, but actually when it comes to analyzing lots of data sets, it's where I think some of the limitations from our side about computation things, I think, will be kind of surpassed by machines like AI. I'm talking about to help human intelligence, really about to make us more empowering as well, to actually understand the data better. And as you can see here, AI role in terms of smart city and the new technologies with IoT here, as you can understand. And decision making is actually the powerful thing, right? Because there are a lot of IoT devices being generated, and however, as you understand, those devices needs intelligence. When I mean that, as an example, it's a manufacturing plant. So instead of actually waiting for that part to be failed, at least if there is a provision for that manufacturing machine to actually predict when it's likely to be failed, at least you can actually prevent this kind of things happening, an example, right? So this is some of the things where AI can be able to use to actually give that intelligence for the devices. And also you can apply that to many things about smart parking, an example, right? You can apply sensors where actually people can able to see when there is a flow of traffic, and also things like how many parking spots are available, so that it actually brings efficiencies in terms of time, as well as obviously in the current world of using the digital everywhere, right? And so this is where AI can able to help in making the decision making on more or less real time to handle this big data. And of course, the 5G is a kind of major enabler for smart cities, because obviously there'll be more and more data generated, and also the speed of consumption is also will be much more exponential. Which with that, obviously, they need some intelligent devices like AI, so that at least they can actually cope up with that information analysis of the data. So some of the use cases we talked about, smart city, I think most of you guys might be aware of, what exactly this AI technology, right? So if you look at fundamentally, some of the fundamental technologies where you can apply in the smart cities, like identity and fraud detection, which means actually applying that face detection technology, or maybe perhaps identifying any fraudulent activities on the real time. Obviously, the technology do exist right now, but it's actually not more or less on the real time, which means that the enforcing authorities, they don't have the technology right now available to able to track all these activities, right? So with technologies like AI, computer vision, and face recognition, you can apply that into any scenarios, and you can able to monitor all the way from face detection to apply that into medical science, as well as into the law enforcement. And of course, the transportation and planning, which is actually the major concern for many cities, like congestion problems and sparking, and many areas about. And also with that, technologies where you can able to monitor the traffic movements and also things like that. And health and greener resources. This is again a topic about energy consumption, and also are we using the electricity and things like that as normal, looking at the peak volumes, and actually looking at how we can able to do some of the things with the technology, so that at least we can have a sustainable growth, and as well sustainable resources available, right? So some of the, obviously, to bring the efficiencies as well as to keep us to be more sustainable. Some of the things we're talking about here in this slide is when you talk about a smart city as an instance, I think there could be many verticals being applied here, like from all the way from manufacturing to the supply chain to the consumers and the retail, as well as if you look at other side on the administration, where you can look at from the government's administration, as well as the health sector, and also things like law enforcement. I think in everything there's a value. You can apply that into many different areas. I think when they collectively bring this together to bring some efficiencies, I think this is where I think everyone can able to see the benefits of it, and perhaps to actually bring incremental value, right, to actually consume the resources and effectively. So some of the things I just mentioned about is yeah.
And if I may just jump in quickly just on that slide, if we were to think to what extent for everybody, right, COVID-19, when we're all at home, when we're in cities, how can our lives be improved? Cities were smart like this, and this type of infrastructure, and this slide already in place. A lot of this social distancing wouldn't be required, or physical distancing is maybe a better way of putting it. And actually the crisis could be over a lot sooner. So I think this is incredibly important, and really speaks to the potential of this type of ecosystem to respond to the crisis we're in.
Definitely, I think that's a really valid point as well to monitor, because most governments are now actually talking about this lockdown, right, where you need to maintain this distance, or whatever we call it as, right? So obviously, when you look at supermarkets or maybe some of the retail stores, I think this technology can be really applied. So actually, you can see the movements of people, as well as actually to see as a surveillance activity, and also you can actually apply that into the high alert areas about where the population is densely, like especially the elderly people, and also where they are very risk prone to kind of this kind of symptoms, right? So you can apply that in kind of more real-time alert mechanisms. So at least it can actually help the front line, like hospitals, as well as the health workers, and even the other supply chain, about the retailers, manufacturers as well, to understand the demand and things like that. Yeah, of course. This is just came very quickly, because even there isn't enough time to prepare the infrastructure and also to make it more usable, right? This is kind of this is where I think everyone now is in the verge of actually how fast we can able to at least have a foundation so that we can able to control this better. Right?
Exactly, because such a large number of coronavirus infections have come from people being in close proximity in supermarkets, and it's crazy that we don't really have functioning systems where we have accurate real-time data as to who is in supermarkets. So we go there and then it's full, and so having that type of information, increasingly talking about managing traffic, but it shouldn't just be traffic of cars, right? It should also be traffic of people, and particularly in situations like this.
Exactly right. I think yes, I think this is some of the things what we are actually trying to help the local authorities as well to see what best we can able to do with the technology what we have. But of course, in the current times, everything is kind of very closed down, right? So it's kind of very difficult to actually to get to that level, right? There is definitely possibilities, but at least this is some of the things we're in the vicinity. Of course, I just mentioned about Matthew just highlighted about the traffic management as well. It's just not about people as well as actually to look at what's actually happening in the city in general, and better governance, which is actually very, very important at this time for most governments and also local authorities to understand about what is a better, how the citizens are actually looking at this as this experience. Right? Are they really happy about it, about the restricted movements, and also is there anything can be done better if they can able to being self-aware or things like that, and collaborative decision making. Also, once you have the information, then actually you can able to make some better decisions about what they can do for the community as well as for that local regions, right? And security and surveillance. Another thing about you can able to look at. Especially that could be very important in the hospital environments. Actually, what's happening in terms of the acute emergencies, and also are they able to manage that the demand as well as with the people. And yeah, many things can happen in that subject. And beyond that, there are things about intelligent city planning, which is about looking at the sustainable waste and also pollution and looking at factors. But an example, one of the things is about people are talking about air pollution as a factor for many people's many people. Health system, right? An example, right? Basically, the lung, the functions and everything. There could be a factor as well in the major cities like London, perhaps New York, and places like Delhi. And actually, there could be an impact. There could be some correlation about what are the factors could be influenced. Or at least if you can understand that better, at least you can prevent these kind of things. In the future about different kind of either viruses or maybe some kind of factors driven by the environmental human cost elements, right? This is where I think Matthew just mentioned about World Economic Forum, about some of the things about mainly about man-made, man-created, human-created things about pollution or things, factors like this, right? Could be definitely avoided with this once we understand them better. So I just mentioned about some of the things about as you might all know that everyone has a phone right now, the smartphones, right? So we all have this technology of face recognition, right? This is also a part of AI-enabled face computer vision technology. So as we all know that you can actually unlock your phone or you can unlock your app and whatever it is, it's actually you can apply the same technology to actually go to further details about looking at security and surveillance, maybe in any industry, right? Even from the supermarkets all the way to the offices as well. Are you allowing people to enter to understand this, threat or is any loitering behaviors and things like that, unwanted behaviors, or maybe some non-authorized people. And you can actually monitor many things about in transportation systems, about the railway stations, airports, and many areas. I think this is some of the technology where you can apply that into. The key here is about the real time, because the faster you can actually analyze the threat, actually this is where actually you can actually make it much more impactful, right? As we have seen in the past, many things could have been avoided because the information has been not dealt in the timely fashion. And of course, you can able to monitor, especially in the security and surveillance. I think obviously we can talk about the national security and airports and many areas, right? This is where computer vision AI technology can be really useful to look at many areas about on the security and surveillance. As you can see, you can actually look at a person's behavior as well, behavioral trends, as well as to look at even from vehicles information and things like that. And just to relay back to some further advantages here, what we're talking about here is that the current technology is available is good, but what we're looking at is like in the explosion of the new big data, we need to look at obviously things about the greater security as well as the customer experience, right? I think citizens as well as the consumers experience. I think with the technologies like AI and edge, which is actually empowering IoT devices and obviously giving that intelligence, like in autonomous cars, an example. So these are some of the possibilities where everyone is actually looking at this information to be processed quicker, so that at least they can able to have this real-time insights, an example. And as you can see with that, you can improve the levels of automation, real-time decision making, and actually more decisions at edge. And with that, I'll leave it to the last slide about the possibilities. I think the idea here is to show about what it can do for the current situations, as well as to understand about what it actually can bring, some efficiencies and sustainability in actually making our cities much better, and also to react to the current situations like COVID, and as well as any other elements like this, so that at least we can able to deal with this with the current things. So I'll leave it out there. I think any questions we can able to pick it up from there. I think thank you guys for
that sounds good. Doug back here. We do have questions coming in, so keep them pouring in. We're going to keep you guys busy here for the remainder of our webinar here for the next 25 minutes. So first question from Colin in the Philippines: local government units, or LGUs, mayors, in addition to that, will be key to advancing smart cities. How best to engage them? What's the entry point? Perhaps smarter health given the current crisis? What do you guys think?
Yeah, Raj, do you wanna start off with it?
Yeah, sure. Definitely, I think the point I want to make out here is that obviously in the current health situation, I think there could be a lot of things can be done on alerting mechanism. This is where once they can able to understand what's happening in kind of if they can able to find out what is the next outbreak would be, and also based on already the information about the census or anything like that, I think that's a very good call. And of course, the challenge now, what we see is that the lack of complete information, right? This is where some of the things cannot be accurate, because you may not able to pinpoint exactly where this where is the next outbreak will be, and also what you can do with it, right? But of course, there's a possibility about once the citizens collectively gather the right information, and also can be in the hands of the right companies, obviously there can be a lot to be done on alerting mechanisms in the current environment for sure. Matthew, yes, add some.
Yeah, I'll no, I think it's a great point, and I guess I would answer it with, the best way you can engage them is really just the question: look, what do you want for your citizens? Of your city, because I mean the data shows quite conclusively that, and this perhaps also to answer some of your the following questions that I can see. Smart cities so far, the best use cases and the best examples have really been in smaller and mid-sized cities. So bigger ones struggle, and that's really been because bigger cities, right? There are a lot of issues to solve, and like with any application of technologies, I talked a bit about before, like with companies, so cities are no different. It's always important to think strategically first, and so rather than think about what can the tech do, you think about, well, what is it that you want for your people? So is it more greener spaces? Is it more, security? Is it better services? Is it, bike, shares, that type of thing? And so there are so many different arrays of services, and Raj showed that in one of the slides. And obviously different mayors will have their different priorities. And so based on those priorities, it's important then to build essentially called in Silicon Valley these customer journey maps, right? Where you basically work your way back from what is it the mayor wants, and you figure out how best that can be done with the technology available. Because one tech somewhere can have a number of different outcomes for different cities, given every city has a unique culture, slightly different populations, different tastes, different appetites, and so on. So obviously different geographical locations as well. So so that's what I'll say on that. And I think so. Just to take one of the other questions that you're asking as well. I just made some notes here. It's whilst it's important to attack this in a very holistic way, in a very strategic way. And yes, it is true that most of the successes in smart cities have been in the developed world, but absolutely that doesn't prohibit developing or emerging market cities from sort of jumping on the boat as well. And in fact, far from it. And there is nothing that says that we won't see in the next 10 years in this decade ahead a huge leapfrog, right? And so we've seen that in many different industries. So you saw this in telco in Africa. You've seen it in finance in China, right? The sort of leapfrogging where, telco went, they leapfrog landlines in Africa straight to mobile. And in China, they leapfrog credit cards and straight to mobile. And so given that in many cities where perhaps infrastructure isn't already that well developed, or that well entrenched, actually that's a huge opportunity for exactly that reason, to bypass and leapfrog and build really smart cities based on technology, rather than having to, like a lot of developed cities, having to begin reimagining and restructuring their existing infrastructure.
Got it. That makes sense. In the question from Bangladesh, in light of, and Maimun Mustafa, in light of COVID-19, what leadership strategies do governments and businesses need to reassess, prioritize if they have to leverage the so 4I.
Yeah, the fourth industrial revolution. Yeah.
The fourth industrial revolution. So we've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution for quite a while now. We're kind of now forced into the situation where people actually need to take it from strategy and thought level to actual practice. And so this also relates to some of the other questions. What are some of the practical use cases too that we should be talking about? The traffic management is fine, right? That's pretty uncontroversial. But now things actually have to be done now instead of like talking about it. So in addition to the question in terms of some of these strategies and thoughts, what are some of the actual things now that you guys see that they're going to start doing, maybe even this year?
Yeah, I mean, that's if I had could see in the future. I mean, it's obviously in many ways. I mean, that's the $1 million question. The biggest thing I'd say is I think this is really it's very much a design problem, right? And so what companies really need to do in terms of the leadership strategies is to look, there is no business without clients. And of course, what we're seeing is a whole restructuring and changing of the economy. And so this is going to cause a lot of pain to a lot of people. And so, to answer the question of what type of strategies need to be reimagined, I think I would even take the question up a level, and it's it is what it is, a situation. So I don't like to use the term this is an opportunity, because it's a terrible situation. But of course, we all need to try to make the best out of it. And so this is also now a great opportunity, not just for governments and not just for cities, but also for leadership in every organization to rethink how can they change more efficient, how can they deliver whatever they were doing, deliver it better to their end client. And of course, that will then mean a lot of business models can be innovated. And I actually think that we may now be on the cusp of one of the great eras of innovation, because people are going to have to think very, very differently about how they do, what they do. And obviously the cities, businesses, we're 7.5 billion people in the world. Just because we're all at home, or most of us are at home, doesn't mean we've gone away. So obviously, things will have to go on, and we're going to continue to consume in some way or other. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity, for this for positive disruption. Yeah, I obviously touched a bit upon it about some of the framework about how the world is changing, and it's just important to really think in those sort of big ways.
Just to add, sorry, Doug, carry on.
I was just going to say, my wife is a criminologist, and so she likes to watch serial killer shows on television, and especially since there's bad news, we're watching a lot of those. And so a lot of the stories are like 20 years ago, and when they talk about analyzing data and what's happening in video cameras and things like that, it's it's night and day between then and now in terms of DNA analysis, the video, just data overall in general. And so it kind of relates to one of the questions, again, this is another one from Colin, that data and analytics skills are still very woefully lagging, even though there's been a lot of progress at local government units. There's still a lot to be done there. How best to address that? There undoubtedly, I'm not sure if you guys have those solutions, but you probably know companies or can suggest companies to get involved so that progress continues.
So maybe I can take that one from the kind of organizational level, and then I'll let Raj answer it from the company level. So at the organizational level, this is exactly the type of area where cities and mayors absolutely should take the lead, because what you see is at the national level, governments between countries, they struggle to have one, data commons. They struggle to have, agreed policies in Europe and the European Union. It's sort of there, even between the EU and US, it isn't. Obviously, between other parts of the world, it isn't. So this is exactly where mayors, given that cities produce by far the biggest amounts of data, this is where mayors really can take the lead and bypass. If countries can't get it done at the national, federal level, no excuse why mayors can't create frameworks, create agreements between each other about how they will manage data and privacy, because of course that is a really big concern. Cybersecurity, one of the biggest issues here. So no doubt about it. And Raj, I'll let you answer it from the company level.
No, that was really a valid question, I think, to talk about now. I think with all this big data exploding, I think the biggest problem for most companies is actually to rethink about what they can do about handling this big data, right? Especially when you look at European GDPR and this kind of principles in place that obviously understanding and securing the data is important. And also they need to think about actually going back to the first principles about actually rechanging some of the business models. Actually, how you're storing the data is really valid, and also it's viable in the current exponential growth of data. And also things like, as you mentioned, that analytics. And analytics is actually a part of the puzzle, where it's descriptive analytics, which is actually what happened in the past. But that doesn't really give you an indication of actually what you can do about it, right? This is where technologies like AI can able to be more predictive. Like an example, things like COVID's an example, you can actually predict a lot of things. And also you can actually be more planned and also actually kind of more reactive than understanding about actually what happened, and also at least you can prevent a lot of kind of some of the current situations that had the government or maybe authorities had planned about it a little bit furtherhand. And definitely I think fundamentally in the technology wise there could be a lot to be done, especially the big companies obviously with massive amount of data, and they can able to think about rechanging their business models and also the strategy, and really looking at what they can do and to be more proactive than just reactive, right? An example that is a fundamental problem across companies as well as the government authorities too about handling this.
If I can just very quickly add on to that, 75% of the data that companies have, they make no strategic use of whatsoever. It just sits there. And most companies don't have a functioning data strategy, and that's why a data strategy is so important. Companies, big corporations, they collect data, they don't make any use of it whatsoever, and that is even worse in cities. Cities produce so much data. You ask an average mayor, or go to your local mayor and ask him, how are you using data? What is your city's data strategy? Right? Do you have a chief data officer? How are you using the data in your city? How are you collecting it? They probably won't know. And so, the use of data, function data strategy, that's perhaps even the single most important thing.
Okay. Raj started to answer this question. This is from Stephanie Qualls in the Caribbean. She asked, all of the concepts discussed entail a significant privacy risk invasion. Can you envision a way to apply AI in a way that allows enhanced security, for example, while protecting our privacy? So Raj, you already started to talk about those. We saw in China where they've already taken the face recognition and trying to figure out, and apparently successfully, face recognition with a face mask, right? So how can AI better be used to not just collect the data, but also protect us?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people do talk about obviously AI being a black box and also actually being non-explainable, right? This is one of the area where actually we are, the things, what the applications and the solutions, what are we doing is actually more completely explainable. When I say explainable, and obviously an example, just keeping in financial services, right? So if you want to approve a loan or some to someone else, an example, a credit decisioning process or whatever that kind of modeling is, whether you use AI technology or some other technology, you should be completely transparent and also explainable in a way that why the system has actually decided to approve the loan based on the factors like that could be his credit history, defaults, or maybe things like, his income and everything like that. This is where I think, the explainability in AI, which isn't common across many AI platforms, that actually will is actually reducing the usage of AI, like she mentioned about not just about the privacy, about also usage of AI. Kind of how do you better use AI to make it more explainable? And obviously this technology is rapidly explainable, rapidly exploding, and it's very difficult to make decisions and also make it more relevant for many things, like like data privacy. Of course, data privacy, it's about, you can do things like anomaly patterns. An example, if there is a data threat or maybe something like the privacy issue, obviously the systems can, AI can able to, at least can able to handle that anomaly behaviors or maybe outliers in the data privacy issues, like before it actually hits, right? An example, like we talked about the data breaches, obviously, things like cybersecurity issues. I think the technology can be applied into those kind of scenarios, but however, data privacy, it's not just completely solved with one technology, right? This is kind of my take on, obviously, it's collective responsibility about how you actually look at your data, as your organization as a strategic way of saving the data, storing data, analyzing data, and also using the right technology. That could be just AI, or that could be anything else. And yeah.
Okay. On kind of in a related area, there's a question from Werner, who's in Abu Dhabi. They use thermal imaging cameras to detect elevated body temperatures. It's a good idea, but in the States and in many other countries, it likely would be illegal. How would issues like this be handled to allow technology to be a benefit in a political environment? And this somewhat relates to some of the ethical questions that we also have a number of questions on.
Yes, definitely. I think I just wanted to talk about a little bit of, yes, the technology do exist, but obviously it's just that, like this example, if you use the same technology in the health area, like healthcare, like obviously image diagnosis, obviously it's kind of much more productive. But however, people are kind of still exploiting the same technology and actually using those kind of use cases you just described. And this is where I think obviously the European Union Council, also they're putting this what you call ethical AI governance and principles, so that actually people can use this technology for the betterment of the current situation, rather than actually exploding and actually doing something which isn't kind of invading the privacy, right? I think the government, this is where again the responsibility of the governing bodies as well as authorities do have to come in place to actually put these principles and standards so that people can use it more ethically, right? I think that's my take on it. Matthew, we can share.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much. I mean, I'll just, very, very briefly. Obviously, the political environment is extremely important, and that's why I think I mentioned before about a bit about how the world is changing and some of the governance issues, and so that's one of the key questions, right? How do we create or recreate the trust between in institutions, and how do we reimagine the relationship between the citizen and the government or the political body? Those are really important things. As long as there is whatever political system you're in, as long as there's trust, then it's going to be okay. And I think the issue is more about when there's a lack of trust, and that's where you start to see issues. So it's a very local issue at the moment. Of course, most people they trust the government. They say, oh, stay indoors, and we have these powers where that's enforced. Obviously, it's quite draconian, and I just think really depends on. It's a very localized issue.
Okay, it's probably cross-cultural as well, too, right? Because you guys are how different countries' cultures change, and I would think, for instance, Matthew, Switzerland would be one where just thinking about the culture that's very like whatever's best for the group of us is best for all of us, that something like that technology would be more received in Switzerland than it would in Louisiana, US, where independent, I'm here in my house, leave me alone, don't, I don't care about what's happening in New York kind of perspective. I mean, is that a fair judgment that part of these decisions will be cultural?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture is exactly, it's a good way. I mean, it's almost, culture which sort of emanates from sociology, right? And we sort of behave how we operate in the system that we see around us. And so Switzerland, there's an enormous trust that the government will do the right thing, that the powers won't be abused. And so therefore, when something like this comes along and the government says something, it's a case of, well, it's going to be in our best interest, so we'll do it, because there is that trust, because there is no track record of the government ever going back on its word or ever abusing its power. So that level of trust, therefore.
Got it. So speaking of Americans in our independent way, there's a question from Moses that relates to something that happened recently when a cruise ship was parked off of the Bay Area and someone ordered wine by drone out in the ocean. So do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will accelerate the UAS or drone deliveries as well as advanced air mobility?
I don't think it's a controversial answer. I'm not sure it will accelerate, because I've already seen that this industry has been accelerating at the rate of knots, before this crisis. So, and already, crisis or no crisis, people still wanted stuff delivered when they were sitting on their couch. Or in December 3 months ago, people wanted stuff delivered when they were on their couch. So that hasn't really changed. I know one drone company locally here, the types of acceleration they're doing, the funding that's in the industry. So I think that's happening anyway, but perhaps some of the innovations that may change, and those sort of technological innovations, those may accelerate.
Great. This is a question regarding coming in from the Philippines. Also, here in the Philippines, we're looking into possibility of sister cities approaches, where developing country, small, mid-sized cities partner with developed country cities that are further ahead for knowledge transfer. Have you seen examples of this, and is it working? So this is kind of the developed country into the more developed, and can we learn from each other?
Yeah, I don't know of any specific use cases. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of sister cities that sister with each other, but I think that the imperative to learn is really, really important. And I think a lot of cities, when they develop those types of collaborations, you'll see a lot of learning opportunities, and that's exactly where the right cities can play a much more prominent role. And not just the really big cities, but you could, this would be a great example, a great opportunity for, let's say, a roster of, small, mid-sized cities to play an outsized role, right? Why should a London or a Paris or a New York be dominant? Maybe the solutions can come from a lot of small cities together on one platform, all having those learnings between each other, and then transferring those learnings. One city can focus more on maybe digital healthcare solutions. Another city can focus more, on developing more green spaces, right? And then when each of them have developed them, that knowledge can be, lifted and shifted into other cities. I think it's a tremendous opportunity.
We only have about a minute and a half or so. Could I ask each of you to take 30 seconds to wrap up, and maybe anything else that you want to reemphasize or that hasn't been said? Raj, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think definitely with the current situation, and also there is definitely an opportunity to look at ourselves as actually to bringing efficiencies, actually collaborative way. I think this is actually will be better, sustainable, and also for the benefit of themselves as well as for everyone, right? I think especially the technologies, when used the right way, like AI or any technologies, actually that will be enhancing the human intelligence rather than the other way around about privacy invasion, things like that. So this is where we are to help companies to actually help on the explainability of AI so that they can help humans at the end.
Fantastic. Matthew, you want to take us home?
I think this crisis shows that there has never been a better time for cities to take the leadership and to be part of the solution. In fact, to be the solution.
Right.
Yeah, no, I feel now very prescient, probably luckily, that Global Chamber has been built around cities, because I've always felt like the actionability of what's actually happening between the government of a city and the people is action oriented, and is, delivering the trash kind of is the next level of getting action to occur that hopefully better for the future. And so I think the issues that you guys have raised today, whether improving those things, using technology to go beyond where we are today, and then learning from this current crisis, so that not only do we avoid this crisis in the future or mitigate it, but solve other problems as well, including climate change. So I really want to thank both of you. Really great conversation. We have way too many questions still coming in, so we'll address that in a blog post this event, and which we will post up online and let everybody know about. The Global Chamber right now is focused in on, we've already shifted everything to virtual. We've already been mostly virtual. We're spending all day, every day, making warm introductions for our members so they connect up with people, and also presenting really interesting people talking about very important topics like what we've done today. We have at least 10 of these virtual events a week for our members to connect in, and they're all free. So please continue to be involved, continue to be engaged, stay safe wherever you are, keep a safe distance. And we're going to get through this, but the key of getting through for you and your business is being innovative, being thoughtful, being patient, doing all the things carefully, so that when we come out of this, and we will come out of it, hopefully sooner than later, that we'll all be better for it. Gentlemen, again, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for everybody around the world for participating today. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.